Hello?
I sent him a message that said, can you hear
In the
us?
chat.
Yeah.
That's my biggest fear. I'm gonna, sing my throat or something. I don't know. Yell at somebody. I'm trying.
Oh, wait, one second. I haven't gone into the webinar yet.
Oh,
I just want to make sure that,
go ahead.
I just want to make sure that he pulls, like,
Hey Tom, are you using speakers in?
How long is your
Clubhouse? 'Cause we can
presentation?
hear you, but
Mr.
Oh, you're worried about me.
Can you hear us yet?
Can you
I
hear
can hear
us?
you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Good.
Yep.
Excellent.
It's all this advanced technology from my son's studio. It's like, turn that off.
How are you doing?
Great. Yeah, we just.
All right, I will call the meeting to order at 6:52 PM on Monday, February 20th, 2023, and I would look for a motion to go into closed session.
I can do that.
Bruce, thank you.
I'll second that.
Megan, thank you very much. And now we need a roll call, I believe.
Howery,
Yes.
Green,
Yes.
Mooney,
Yes.
Fessler,
Yes.
and Fisher, yes.
All right, so we will retire to closed session and see you in a little bit, Mr. Mooney.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, I will end the webinar now, and we'll reopen it for when you return to open session.
Okay.
Back in close, or open session.
I think we need Angie.
We need Angie.
Where is
Oh,
she?
yeah, we sure do.
Where'd Angie go?
We really cannot survive without her.
Well, I mean, we're not officially back until she makes us back.
Open session once again, and the first order of business is to look at the consent agenda items. We have the minutes from the February 6th, 2023 school board meeting. We have some general fund vouchers and purchasing card transactions. General fund vouchers 178986 through 179208. And 292100 through 292135, and purchasing card transactions dated 12/21 through 1/20/23. Then we've got some other co-curricular staffing recommendations, administrative staffing recommendations, and some personnel items not necessary to vote. So I would look for a motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Kay.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Megan. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
I just want to acknowledge that the board has just hired our new high school principal, who happens to be in attendance, so thank you for approving that recommendation. Brett Jacobson is here and wanted to just kind of wave to you and give a 20-minute speech about his
Make that good first
philosophy.
impression, that's what we want. There we go.
Nice to meet everybody. Thank you very much. Yeah, very excited, obviously, to get started. Obviously, I'll be around a little bit throughout the spring while I make the transition. But yeah, looking forward to July 1 when we can really dive in. But yeah, looking forward to being a part of McFarland. So thank you to everybody. I don't know how many people are tuned in here, but thanks to those that maybe participated in the hiring process. I was able to meet quite a few people that participated, so that was great to see. Obviously, a lot of community support and a lot of invested parties. So that's always exciting to see when you're looking to join a community. So that was very neat. So nice to meet everybody, and yeah, thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome.
We're excited to have you. Congratulations and welcome. Look forward to working.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very much.
Appreciate it.
Welcome.
You are not required to stay, just so you know.
It's all good. I'll stick around for a little bit.
Okay, you're welcome.
My youngest son was part of the interview process, and he was very excited when he learned that you were hired, so,
Well, great. I'm happy to hear it.
yeah.
Aw, that's good, it's nice, thank you.
Mhm.
Congratulations.
All right, moving on then, do we have any public comments?
We have not received anything in writing. If you'd like me to, I'd like to ask the members who may be attending via Zoom. if
Please
they're
do.
on. All right, one moment. All right. If you'd like to make a public appearance by speaking to the board, please utilize the Q&A portion found at the bottom of your Zoom window. In the Q&A, we would ask that you type your name, address, subject of interest, and whether you have discussed this item prior to the meeting with either a district administrator or President Howery. After submitting the information, I would transfer you over to speak to the board. So, want to hand that to me, thank you. All right. All right, we'll give people a via Zoom an opportunity to register if they wish.
Okay, and I will,
We have had one person right now who is registered.
excellent. Thank you very much. All right. In accordance with School Board Policy 167.3, the McFarland School Board welcomes public comment during regular meetings. The board will accept public comments via individuals who are physically present at the board meeting, who are participating in the board meeting virtually, or who have sent an email to the board president or superintendent in advance of the meeting. Please note the following. Participants are required to register their intention to participate in the noticed public comment portion of the meeting upon their arrival at the meeting and shall begin their comments by stating their name, address, and group affiliation if and when appropriate. Participants shall address only topics within the legitimate jurisdiction of the board. The board members will not directly respond to comments and may only take action on topics that are on the published agenda. Participants are asked to limit their comments to 5 minutes in duration. Written comments will have a word limit of 250. The portion of the meeting for public comments is limited to 60 minutes unless extended by a vote of the board. Participants shall direct all comments to the board and observe reasonable decorum. So we do have one public speaker here in our presence this evening, Dr. Hickey. The floor is yours.
Jim Hickey, I think everything you said there, I would have to, I can't believe you're gonna let me talk. Anyway, I just wanted to take a minute tonight to acknowledge what I would call the third day of school, of every day. I had the opportunity just within the last couple of weeks to see come up during the middle school play, I think in the auditorium. And then I'm a regular swimmer in the morning, and they had a couple of massive meets recently on grounds here, as well as doing phenomenal at state. The bottom line is, and I trust you understand this, but I think it's good for other people to hear it and not, the wonderful job that those people, all aspects of it, from the coaches to the managers, Stu and that crew, Alicia, the custodial crew that it is a big pain. I remember those days for them. Enough can't be said. And you talk about the value to this community in opening up our facilities you can't even put a value on it. It's beyond what you can value. When I started out as an assistant principal back in the day, centuries ago, I remember John Schieffer, my principal, my tutor, so to speak, he said the most misused facility, public facility, is a facility that is not used. And I'll tell you what, you guys got to be proud as a board. Our community should be proud because the amount of engagement, the amount of community involvement in getting in and out of the building here is phenomenal. And everything from parking, what could have been a disaster with the play and a swim type activity, can't say enough. So hats off, thank you, and thank you to all those people. Stu and that crew comes to mind because that's who I deal with, that young Ethan Hansel. And by the way, I appreciate that. I remember talking to the board long ago about that. You talk in the WISO concert hosting, you cover all the bases, and it just can't, thank you. You aren't making it insurmountable to get here. Now, I do have one other question. It's a question. If I wanted to make another comment later in the meeting, can I do that, or do I have to do it now? Your call, obviously. And, I mean...
If you want to make another comment, you are certainly welcome to make another comment. I would love to see you do it now.
Oh, is that probably more appropriate?
I think.
Okay.
No?
Well, it's all right. I don't want to...
Would you prefer to wait until after?
Well, I don't know if I can do that. I don't want to
Yeah.
breach, me.
Yeah.
Right, always between the lines.
Follower.
It shouldn't be a big, I'm not here to, it isn't contrary to all my emails,
We're
so
good at emailing.
whatever's in the policy, I can sit back down, write the thing, give it to you and say something. No, your call, I respect everything.
Yeah, I think, in the agenda, public comments is now, the time for
Okay.
that is now, so I think
Okay.
we don't have another public comments
Right.
part of the agenda later,
Okay.
but
Do you want me to, it's so, can I sit down and come back? Or-
you don't
okay,
have to
okay.
sit down.
Hey,
We'll pretend like you did.
Yeah, okay. On another, does the clock start again? No.
Yes,
On
we will
another-
restart the clock.
You get all new time.
Yeah,
an
I
entire
bet-
new 2
I
minutes.
bet you will.
It's like a game show.
Anyway, on another note, I think, I have it's obvious, I think, that I have a great interest I'm a history guy, and I have a great interest in diversity and equity, and certainly minorities, however they're a minority, from the indigenous populations to our blacks to our Hispanics, on down the line. The question I was looking for, and I want to thank Superintendent Tarnitzer and Mr. Howry sitting down. I've been looking for having some kind of information out to the public. You can see how interested they are about the equity slur and hate speech. The one question that I would have, and you may be addressing it in that presentation, you may not be. But let me back up and just say one more time, thank you for meeting with me. I found it's very nice you're having this tonight, and that's good. It's kind of sad, maybe the thousands of people out there in radio land are gonna listen to it or pick up in the New York Times or something, a positive thing. The bottom line is, the question is, the district, and you don't have to answer it now, you can answer it in your speech, not your speech, your presentation. The district hired a Dr. Holly out of California, Saruki Holly, I believe, who is, cultural, responsive learning, I believe. And, you adopted him, you had him come out, you had him talk about the, racial slurs and hate speech. And then he did that, and then all of a sudden, later in November, I think it was November, December, there was a switch up, and it's in the thing I sent when we met, Aaron, if you want, or Superintendent Tarnitzer. I can give you a copy of that, I can text it to you. But you're probably gonna address it. Anyway, I'm just curious, why the change? And, you hire someone, the guy's a quote an expert. He has been at 2,000 or more presentations, and I think the answer was, this was the answer when I met with you guys, was you want it to be more localized with the local people, kind of like Dane County. Well, I kind of get that, and maybe that's it, and it is what it is, but it's just kind of surprising and a little interesting, because McFarland always kind of, I thought, liked to be on the edge of what's right, and not what's right, but out there. So, how does that impact what I'm interested in? Like, I'd be curious, and that goes probably to Melissa, is, what about like teaching, I think I've seen a new policy, and I'll learn it tonight, but like to Kill a Mockingbird, if you're gonna do Frederick Douglass's book that's just out, Huck Finn, Mark Twain, there's not good stuff in there. And who's that other author that kids read? There's multiple. So I'm curious as to how that's all. I trust those books aren't being thrown out. We're whitewashing history. That's my question, a little bit. And I understand. I guess that's it. As a history guy, I don't think we can be. I think it's good to discuss and have those engagements at appropriate, with appropriate language at the appropriate times, period. So that's a question with lots of answers from me, of course. So
We appreciate that, too.
I'm gonna hang around to hear you all. Again, I do appreciate your repeated answers, and I would just say to you, on the last round, it is what it is. We probably disagree a bit, but I get it, I kind of get it. I'm kind of getting it, so, thank you.
Thank you,
Hey,
Dr. Hickey.
Oh, I'm not done. No.
Well, you're welcome.
Yeah,
I'm sure
took
you're
time,
not.
I think
What's
you
the time? But thanks.
I got
I
you.
might sneak out to see how the basketball game's doing, but I don't want to miss your presentation.
All right. Okay, so moving on, Angie, we have no other,
We have had no additional.
all right. So we'll move on to our high school student report. Hi, welcome.
All right, just get this pulled up here.
Okie dokie. Lots going on at MHS in the past 2 weeks. Lots of stuff. So first of all, last week, our McFarland High School Hope Squad, which is a club dedicated to peer-to-peer suicide prevention and raising awareness for mental health, last week hosted a Hope Week, kind of designed to lift the hopes of MHS students around the school. So they put together like student raffles, candy guessing games for prizes, scavenger hunts around the school. And in the morning, they also treated MHS students to beverages to welcome them on Monday morning. And on Tuesday, handed out self-love packages. So congrats to the Hope Squad for that very successful week. This past weekend-ish, sort of, February 17th, Friday, our boys swim team won the first runner-up at state, which is incredibly impressive, probably the best they've done so far. So congratulations to them. Our girls basketball also won the Rock Valley Conference. So they secured the championship. So congratulations to our girls basketball team. Another MHS organization at state, the Visual Arts Classic team, which is full of high school students who are very passionate about art, competed at Carroll College and are off to state after winning first in the critical thinking art project, winning second in the art history quiz bowl, and third place overall. So amazing job to our artists. Another super exciting thing, because it is Black History Month, our McFarland High School Black Student Union has partnered with 608 Threads and created an online store where these wonderful designs can be purchased. So like awesome job to our BSU for designing this awesome logo featuring a bunch of very important like Black figures throughout history. Specifically, like good job to the two members who created the design, Chandra Nichols and Alex Collins. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Anybody got anything?
I don't have any questions, but this continues to be one of my favorite parts of the school board meeting, because I think it's, besides your presentation skills, it's just really fun to hear all the things. Even though I have students in the district and specifically in the high school, I don't always hear about most of those things, so thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I think the comment I would have, Joey, is that we as a board, at least myself and I presume the others, we're here for the kids.
Yeah.
And the more often we can hear about kids, what they're doing, what their challenges are, the better informed we are. So when we make decisions, we can make more sound decisions that will directly support the success of all the students. I have to comment on Connect. You are certainly inclusive of, probably all the groups at the high school. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, we sure try. All right. Well, thank you guys. Have a good rest of the meeting.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Joey.
Thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Okay, moving on. We've got our language arts curriculum review and adoption update. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mooney, I will have to get a copy of this to you via email afterwards.
Okay,
It is
thank you.
nothing that you need to be able to listen along, but information that you'll be able to read and follow up on afterwards. Mr. Tarnitzer asked me to give an update on our ELA curriculum search and review process, which is focused on K-5 for the most part. That's what I'm going to focus on this evening. But he also said, since you're coming to the board, why don't you teach them everything there is to know about the science of reading? So I'm going to take about 7 minutes to do that, and then you'll be experts, and after that we'll move on. But this, in all honesty, will be a very brief overview of the science of reading, give you a little bit of context and background knowledge, because that is something that has informed our committee's work, and so it's important to give you just, a dip in the waters of that information, and then any questions you have or follow-up information, let me know, and we can have more in-depth conversations as you'd like to. In that packet, I have the closest thing that we have to a DPI definition of the science of reading. DPI doesn't come out and define it, but they do release an informational guidebook on dyslexia and related conditions. This is Appendix E from that document, and in that appendix, it gives 3 possible definitions, or 3 kind of suggested definitions of the science of reading, which are notated there with those orange dots on the side. I really appreciate that it says the science of reading is referenced in academic literature, in the popular press, and on social media. And it's important to understand what researchers mean by this term, because it's kind of thrown out there. People use it in different ways. Because it is science, it's a broad, interdisciplinary body of research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And it really has culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop in students. Now, because it is science, it's based on the scientific method, and that does mean that it changes and evolves over time. And in that large body of evidence, you can probably find a lot of information that would prove maybe even contradictory points at times. Now, a lot of the information that I hear or see, in social media or in journals, when they're talking about the science of reading, they're really focused on phonics. And that makes a lot of sense because for people who have been in education for a while, you know that the pendulum tends to swing back and forth between ends of ideologies. And with the science of reading, for a long time, the pendulum swung away from phonics, and in a lot of ways, it's swinging back. But within the science of reading, people who, have really studied it and know a lot more than 7 minutes worth of information about the science of reading, they would say it is not phonics alone. It is phonics, yes, daily, explicit, comprehensive phonics instruction is important for students to develop as readers. And as I talk about our committee's process, you'll see that we valued and put a lot of importance on that in our search, but it's not only that. When I say it's not only that, what else is it? Well, if you continue in your packet, there's the rest of Appendix E, and then there's a page that was intentionally left blank so that you could look at 2 models representing the reading process side by side. The bottom one that you have there is almost famous at this point. Anytime you read an article about the science of reading, they will reference Scarborough's reading rope. And that rope really blends together. Scarborough is a researcher, and what he says is if you are going to become a skilled reader, you need the blue part of the rope there at the bottom, which is word recognition skills, syllables, phonemes, alphabetic principle, decoding, sight reading. You need all of those. Really, someone who knows, who has studied reading research a lot will maybe not appreciate that I'm going to lump that in under the hat of phonics, but kind of in a general audience setting, those would be phonics skills, some basic foundational reading skills pieces. But you don't only need that. You also need some comprehension skills. So you also need background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And what this model says is that you can't just work on one first and then the other. You have to work on them both together. When we think about our kindergartners, they're really going to focus most of their day on the blue part of the rope, but they have to also be building background knowledge and vocabulary at the same time. And the way they're going to do that is orally. So the teacher will be reading aloud complex text with rich vocabulary. They'll be doing that verbally with their students while the students are also picking up that decoding and learning to read on their own. As students become proficient readers, the blue part of that rope becomes increasingly automatic, and skilled readers need to spend less and less of their working memory on those decoding skills, and their ability to use language comprehension becomes increasingly strategic. They'll be applying syntax and metaphor in more and more complicated ways as they become more proficient readers. Now that famous graphic, what I like the most about it is it matches up almost completely with DPI's model of reading, which is the other graphic that I have for you in that yellow box. That blue part of the rope, the word recognition, happens to also be the blue part of DPI's graphic with foundational skills. It's hard to read because of the coloring there, but it has the same phonemic awareness skills, phonics skills, or orthographic knowledge, and all of those foundational literacy skills are in blue. The rope part that is kind of orange or red, those language comprehension skills we talked about, that's the green part of DPI's knowledge right there in the middle. But what DPI's model adds that I appreciate is it also says you need cognitive skills as well. You need a purpose for your reading that helps with your comprehension. You need some strategic reading behaviors and comprehension strategies. And then they fill the entire graphic there with a box that says it's also important to think about the social emotional learning that students need, their choice and access to books, and the interest and relevancy that the topic has to them. All of these are pieces that we spent much more than 7 minutes on as a committee learning about and unpacking before we began our search process so that we could make sure that our search was grounded in the latest and up-to-date research about reading. On the next page is another piece that we looked at. The next page has 5 columns, and these are the key shifts in the ELA standards that came out in 2020. So back in 2010, Wisconsin adopted the Common Core state standards for ELA, and as a part of the regular review of standards, the ELA standards were updated in 2020. With those updates, the 2020 standards built on the foundation of existing standards and reflect new research and understandings of English language arts and literacy. So these new standards were meant to reflect the science of reading as well. As with anything, you'd find people who would disagree and say it didn't go far enough, but they did look at the updated research and reading as they revised the standards. These shifts are the areas that DPI and the people who wrote the standards, which is a committee of educators from around the state, by the way, they said these are the things that we should really be focusing on. Shifts 3, 4, and 5 were all existing from the 2010 standards. Those are focuses on students engaging with regular practice with complex text, both literary and informational. Students engaging with reading, writing, and speaking that's grounded in textual evidence, so being able to make a claim and then point to the text and say how they can back that up right from what they are reading. And also that students build knowledge through text. Those 3 shifts are nationwide shifts from the Common Core standards, and what's great about that is there are a lot of nationwide resources that evaluate curriculum resources and how well they're aligned to those shifts, and there are a lot of tools that we can pull from that are really focused on those 3 areas as well. Shifts 1 and 2 are new and specific to Wisconsin, but they make great connections to a lot of the work we have been doing in McFarland locally. Key shift 1 is about the importance of recognizing your own and others' identities through text. That's something that I've talked to the board about before, and something that even predating these standards, we have that statement of intentionally inclusive curriculum in McFarland that prioritizes students seeing themselves and others fairly and accurately represented in the texts and materials that they read. Shift 2, the short version there, all students are flexible users of language. That really talks about using your language specific to the audience and purpose. Tonight, as I'm speaking to you, I talked earlier about phonics. I kind of use that as a catch-all term based on the audience that I'm talking to. If I was talking to a group of reading specialists, they would take offense to me calling that phonics overall, and they'd want me to really talk about specifically with phonemic awareness and orthographic mapping and use some of those specific vocabulary words. As we're teaching our students, we want them to think about the audience that they're speaking or writing to and making sure they're using language flexibly based on that audience and purpose as well. And that's key shift number 2. All of that knowledge, we spent a lot of time reading, learning about it, particularly with the members of the ELA committee. We developed an updated literacy philosophy and beliefs document that you have in your packet as well. That is heavily paraphrased from the state standards. Since we are obligated and our goal is to meet the state standards, we wanted to build on that foundation that they lay out for us. And that kind of ends my 7 minutes on the science of reading. Just a very brief background into what it is. And I guess if I had any advice for you, if someone brings, the science of reading or wonders, does McFarland believe in the science of reading? My answer would be, what do you mean when you say the science of reading? And kind of getting their clarity on exactly that. And also, of course, we are always staying up to date in the latest research in science, in math, in all of the subjects to make sure that we are providing the best instruction that we can for our students. I'm going to pivot and talk about what we did with all of that information. So the ELA curriculum review really began pre-COVID. We were giving surveys to teachers I worked on creating the surveys in the fall of 2019. We gave them to teachers in January and February of 2020, and I was in the process of collecting survey data from K-8 teachers at the time and going around to the schools and talking about a summary of what we heard. Then we took a break and paused the process while we worked on virtual learning for a little bit. Came back from that, we did do some virtual committee work and learning and unpacking the new 2020 standards when they came out, actually while we were still doing virtual learning at home. And the committee really came together. It concludes teachers from every grade K-5, including interventionists and special education. One of the first things we did was develop that philosophy statement. We also then developed a tool to evaluate curriculum. We adopted a tool from the Institute of Educational Sciences in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Education. That tool was aligned to shifts 3, 4, and 5 that we just talked about, which are nationwide shifts, and we added to the tool things to really highlight shifts 1 and 2 in the standards, as well as components that we value and prioritize here in McFarland. Some of the McFarland-specific pieces had to do with wanting a curriculum that had great assessments built in, wanting curriculums that would fit within our schedule and the number of minutes and days that we had, and pieces like that. That committee, so that was a year's worth of work that I just talked about in a few sentences. Learning about the standards, philosophy statement, creating a tool. Then, over the summer, I narrowed our choices down to a top 5 based on the priorities of the committee. What we're really looking for was something that could be as comprehensive as possible. We didn't want to have to piecemeal and pull a little bit from this and a little bit of that. Our first priority was to say, do we have a curriculum that could be as comprehensive as possible and have all of the components of literacy included in one place? We came up with 5 options to look at. Those were ARC Core, EL Education, Super Kids, Wonders, and the Units of Study, which is our current curriculum. The committee spent a full day on each of those 5. So 1 day a month, they had a sub. They came in, actually to this room most of the time, to review the curriculum. Because of our sub shortage, instead of getting together as a K-5 group on Tuesdays, the kindergarten and first grade group would come in. On Wednesday, 2nd and 3rd grade. On Thursday, 4th and 5th grade would come in. And we did that every month, September through January, looking at our 5 choices to narrow our options down. Now, 3-5 is still in the process of considering next steps, but K2 has made a decision. So our K2 teachers will implement Wonders curriculum in all of our classes next school year. That was a unanimous decision by the committee. And again, people who have been in education and particularly literacy for any amount of time, to come to a unanimous decision about something is rare and something that is to be celebrated.
Could you repeat that once more?
Wonders curriculum for K2, yep. We chose Wonders because it's the best option that meets our need, specifically for daily explicit and systematic foundational skills, lessons in all areas of the ELA standards, reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language skills, and it's aligned with those 5 shifts that we've talked about, particularly with a focus of complex grade-level texts, vocabulary, and building background knowledge through text. The last 2 pages that you have in your packet is a printout of an email that I sent to K2 staff that explains why we selected Wonders and has some more information about it from the ELA curriculum committee. They helped draft this and put it out. Next steps for K2, just last week we had a Zoom call with some teachers from Milton who are already using Wonders to kind of pick their brain, learn what they like about it, what some of their struggles were. I saw some emails floating around between teachers already saying, oh, I reached out to that teacher already from Milton and she sent us pictures of what her classroom looks like and she sent us a link to the way she organizes her materials. So we'll continue to collaborate with teachers in schools that are already using Wonders going forward. We're hoping by spring break to have identified training dates so that teachers know, okay, this is when the training is going to happen. We're also hoping to have the materials in hand before the end of the school year. Our teachers are very motivated to learn. They don't want to wait until the last minute or until August to prepare for the school year, so we're hoping to be able to send them home with curriculum resources, perhaps do some training yet this spring, and then follow it up again in August for any new hires or kind of a refresher as we go. That's K2, 3-5, and then I will pause for questions. I'll take a breath and some water in a moment. 3-5 is currently at the process where they've narrowed their choices to 2 choices, or of course the nebulous third other, but they have narrowed it to the units of study with adjustments. So if we are to pick the units of study, that would not mean changing nothing. It would be sticking with the units of study, but focusing on the areas that we know we're currently lacking, building in a focus on complex text, vocabulary, word study, and grammar. Their other choice would be Wonders as well. So 3-5 is considering Wonders as an option for them. The committee wants to send a survey out to all 3-5 teachers to get some feedback on those choices. The committee wants to look at the 2 choices, units of study and Wonders side by side, maybe do some site visits or Zoom calls with teachers who are using Wonders in grades 3-5 to get their feedback, as well as talk to districts that are still using the units of study but are getting different results from us to see what is it that's a little bit different about the way they're implementing the materials. We are hoping to have a decision for 3-5 by spring break as well, just so that we can move on to, if it does mean ordering materials, we can get ahead of that. If it does mean, adjusting what we currently have, preparing for summer curriculum hours or professional development for teachers to make sure that we can make some of the adjustments that we know we need to stay in alignment with the science of reading, with the state standards, those 5 shifts, and our philosophy statement. There is the update on everything you need to know about the science of reading, as well as where we're at in the process. What questions can I help with?
One I had was immediately, I was going to ask, are there area schools? Obviously, you've mentioned at least K2, Milton. Would we be kind of atypical if we ended up having 2 different starting 3-5? Or is that not necessarily uncommon at all?
It is not uncommon. A lot of the schools, Milton, for example, their elementaries are K3, and then it's a different building, I think 4-5. And so Milton has Wonders for K through 3, and then they have a different curriculum actually for 8.
Okay.
Janesville has also adopted Wonders, and they use it all the way K5. And I think that has to do with the structure of their buildings. I've also talked to a school near Milwaukee who uses Wonders for K through 3, and then something else beyond that. So it wouldn't be unheard of for us to have 2 different curriculum options. It would create transitions for us to manage. Vocabulary and structure would be a little bit different. Students would have to adjust to the style of the different curriculum whenever they switch. The middle school is continuing with the units of study, so even if we kept Wonders all the way K5, there would still be that transition from 5th to 6th grade to the units of study.
All right.
Are you satisfied with the pace of the work so far? Are we kind of on schedule where you thought, we would pretty much be at this point?
Yes and no. I wish we didn't have that pause in the spring of 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been better.
So do I.
Yep.
So do I.
And I really, if you walk around schools or talk to teachers at, Conrad Elvium particularly, they have been ready for a change for a while. And so the quickest thing we could have done is, by myself, I could have picked a new curriculum and said, this is the new curriculum. That would have been the quickest change we could have made. It would probably not have gone as well as this went, right? For a number of reasons. And so I think, given that we wanted to have a participatory process, we wanted a lot of teachers and feedback involved, this is about as quick as it could have gone, given everything. Pulling teachers out of the classroom once a month even was a big ask for their students, for them to write subplans. And if we would have tried to compact that work and say, okay, let's, meet 5 days in a row in September, we can't do that, right? We can't do that to the kids who need, The reason these teachers are so great is we need them with our students every day. We don't need them in this room all day. We need them with their students. So doing this any quicker would have been really difficult. Also, it would have, the other idea was, could we have done the search all over the summer and then been ready for this school year? Well, maybe, but we would have probably had a limited number of teachers who were available for those days over the summer, and then we wouldn't maybe have had the right voices at the table or as much participation. So, like the teachers that I hear from, yeah, I wish it could have gone more quickly, but I think given as much input as we wanted in the process, this is about as quickly as it could have moved. I'm really pleased. The goal was to decide by spring break. So the fact that we decided by early February was nice. It's going to get us like one step ahead maybe of some other districts implementing in terms of the global supply chain and ordering materials and getting them here before the end of the school year. I've been talking with the publisher, and he's pretty confident we will have the K2 materials by June. So that is good.
That's great.
Yeah, Melissa, I would applaud the way you did it, because I think in the end, yeah, it might be a little bit slower up front, but if you have all the teachers behind this, they're gonna fly now.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think you'll make it up, and you'll be, I think, much more successful doing it the way you did, so kudos to you.
Thank you.
So I have a question. What is the, I guess, reasoning in looking at those two curriculums for 3 through 5? Is there something specific that the teachers really like about the old curriculum that they want to keep, or?
Yeah. And no. In that survey that I mentioned, it was split. There were teachers who were very passionately advocating for continuing with the units of study, and there were teachers very passionately advocating for not the units of study. And I don't think it's opinion-based, and none of their opinions are wrong. The reasoning that they provided for sticking with the units of study was strong and based in evidence. The reasons they provided for wanting something different and the things that they're seeing that the units of study are lacking is based in evidence, reasoned. It is not flippant, it is not without deep thought. There is a lot of deep thought on both sides of that decision. The units of study provides a lot of authentic texts, a lot of time for students to have choice in what they're reading. Some in the survey indicated that a curriculum that's structured like the units of study is easier to support students because there is so much choice and flexibility. Others have said it's not enough. It's not supporting our students who need more support. It's not structured enough. It's difficult to support when there's not enough structure or background there, and that the units of study doesn't have enough foundational skills, and those word study, vocabulary, and complex text parts of the shifts aren't there. Who's right, who's wrong? It is really hard to say. There are districts in the area that are using the units of study who aren't even in a search process. They have said, nope, we have invested, we are getting the types of results we need, we are going to stick with it. If you follow the national news about reading, the units of study has had a lot of critiques. Now, particularly those critiques do come with the areas of foundational skills, which are the biggest in the standards in grades K through 3. By the time you get to 4th and 5th grade, the standards and foundational skills really say, apply your knowledge in context. It's a, 1 or 2 lines. It's a smaller part of the puzzle as we get older. And so, from where I sit, I've told people this. I wake up, and some days I really think, yep, we should stick with the units of study. Other days I wake up and I say, yep, we should switch to wonders. And sometimes I wake up and I go, what's the third option? Like, what is this other thing that we haven't found yet? If anyone has an idea of what that third thing is, I am all ears and happy to look and listen more. It'll be interesting, and I think the biggest thing that makes the most difference in our outcomes will be teachers' self-efficacy, their belief that what they do matters, and their belief that they have the resources and support to succeed. Also, their belief that their students can succeed, again, with the resources and support and training they have. That is so much more important than any curriculum resources that we have. The other thing would be the instructional practices. So what is happening between teachers and students is going to matter more than the resources altogether. So how do we make sure we are providing teachers with things that make them feel confident, that give them the support that they need so they can do that important work with students?
Well, obviously, this is a difficult, complicated, complex issue. Best probably not done in haste,
Yeah,
I would think.
I agree.
yep.
So, again, kudos to you and the entire team. Our thanks, and keep us informed. Let us know what's
Will do.
going on.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
You bet. Hate speech policies, Mr. Tarnitzer, the floor is yours.
All right, well, the trees are crying. I made a lot of copies,
Oh, boy.
so I apologize for that, but I didn't want you to be short of paper.
You didn't give one to Tom yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And enough for the
At
audience.
least double-sided.
All of
so
the audience.
there's that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just make me feel better by taking it.
And at the end of the evening, we're gonna have this down to one side of a piece of paper.
Yeah, right. That's cute. And we can put this on our website as well. So really, the purpose of this presentation here tonight is to provide an overview of the policies that exist within the district regarding the use of hate speech and slurs by any member of the school community. And so, as you heard in our public comments, this was the idea for this presentation. I appreciate Mr. Hickey for bringing this forward because it seems that through our work, particularly this year, we've had communication to staff. We've had communication to students. We've had communication to families and limited communication to the broader community about these policies. And so people know things in pockets. And I'm hopeful that in what I've heard I'm being timed, what will be roughly 20 minutes, I can provide an overview and a context and then entertain your questions and comments for that. These are delicate issues. These are evolving issues. So I guarantee you that the policies that we're discussing right now will likely look different
Yeah.
in 5 years, in
Yes.
10 years, and would have looked different 10 years ago. So know that I recognize there's a variety of viewpoints, and that these are not my policies, these are our policies to share. So I divided them into a few groups. The first group that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to share, is policies for all members of the school community. And as I go through these policies, I did attach all of the policies, and the email I sent and everything that we're going to talk about is in there in its entirety. But I'm going to highlight some of the language. The first policy we're going to talk about is one the board should know well. This is policy 2105.01, District Resolution in Support of Diversity and Equity. This was a policy that really was formally adopted in May of 2021, but it was a resolution adopted by the board prior to that in June of 2020. And that was a time this was brought to us by students and community members. This resolution, the board met, discussed it in open session, made some changes, and then adopted the resolution. Things I want to highlight of that is it's clearly stated in there that the district unequivocally condemns racism, hate speech. So that phrase is right there included. That vilifies, humiliates, or incites hatred against a person or a class of persons, bigotry, hateful behaviors, and all forms of unlawful discrimination. A line I really want to highlight, and one that I think is important for the district to demonstrate their commitment, is that these behaviors harm students and they harm all of us, and the school district must impose appropriate consequences. Consequences aren't specified in terms of what those are, which I do appreciate because it allows flexibility based on the context of the situation, which will be a theme in my conversation, my presentation to you. A much less interesting policy in my mind is policy 7544, but it is important, use of social media. So I think this policy, I'm not sure exactly on the origins of it. It is a policy that I think emanated from the policy service that we use in the district.
which is Neola, but it was adopted formally by the board in June of 2020. And I highlight it because it does say that district-approved social media sites shall not include content that is, and it states several things, but one of those is constitute hate speech, and again says staff or students who post prohibited content may be subject to disciplinary action. In terms of policies specific to students, the one that is really, like, it's the sort of what students think of as the hate speech policy is included, and it was an addendum to our handbook initially. So this really came in the 2020-21 school year. The administrative team, through leadership in the high school, put together this policy, and then it was formally made part of the family handbook the following year, 2021 and 22. There's a lot of great language in there that I think guides our work, but it again says that we condemn racism and hate speech. It says in capital letters, I will not shout it to you, but hate speech is not protected speech. It has consequences, and those consequences can vary. So if it says if a student has a disciplinary referral that involves the usage of hate speech, it will result in additional consequences. Consequences and restorative practices will be based on the offense and determined at the building level. And I highlight that because that is, again, I'm coming back to this theme. I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes that when you say that there will be consequences, that means anytime someone would say something, that means a suspension or, expulsion or whatever consequence you have in your head. But consequences really do vary. If you ask a student having an educational learning opportunity with a school administrator, feels like a consequence. And I've had many of those in my time. And sometimes that is the level of intervention that's needed. So consequence to me just means there'll be a response. It won't be ignored. And so sometimes people toss around the phrase zero tolerance. And, my nuanced way of addressing that is to say that in my mind, zero tolerance is we're going to do something, but the what, I think, is open to the context of the situation and the judgment of all of those involved. Certainly as a school administrator, I can tell you that a student's ability to reflect on their behavior, take responsibility for their behavior, does have an impact on the consequences. That's an important part of the process, their intentions as well. This handbook policy also talks about everyday acts of intolerance manifesting themselves in many ways, lists many name-calling slurs, defines hate speech as communication that carries no meaning other than to vilify, humiliate, or incite hatred for a group or class of people, especially in circumstances in which the communication is likely to provoke violence. So this idea of this form of expression that is offensive is listed there, and it can take many, many forms. And it's hard to make an inclusive list of all of the forms, but symbols are included. The next policy is one that should be familiar as well, Policy 5517. This is a board policy, student anti-harassment. In the definition of harassment, it states it also includes hate speech and the use of language or behavior, which is the use of language, behavior, images, symbols that express prejudice against a particular group on the basis of any protected characteristics. And it has some examples provided. Making statements that promote violence toward a racial or ethnic group, drawing, displaying, or posting, images or symbols of prejudice. And the example given is swastikas. That in and of itself, a swastika is considered an example of hate speech. It also talks about racial slurs and nicknames implying stereotypes, epithets, and/or negative references regarding racial customs. So it breaks down, there's racial harassment, religious harassment, which involves religious slurs, and that natural origin, ancestry harassment, and they reference ethnic slurs. So they separate it out, but you can see the theme there. This was, as far back as I can trace it, first adopted and then revised in December of 2013, but our most recent version was adopted in November of 2021. For staff, there's similar, there's three types of policies, board policies about employee anti-harassment, and one's for administration, one's for professional staff, and one's for support staff. This is the thing that the board comments about how annoying it is that there's 3 policies that say the same thing, but that's the way it's set up. And so it talks about, you'll see that same exact language that you saw in the student policy about harassment, including hate speech in the examples included. You'll also see the separate areas referenced that I talked about. So I'm not going to go into the details on that because it's the same as the student policy. And isn't that nice? Important to be consistent. The next one is a really important one, and then I think the last thing I'll talk about is an email I sent with the hopes of providing clarity. This position on reading slurs and texts, the context where this came from, really, this was distributed to staff in May of 2021, but it was after involving people in the process. Initially, it was drafted by myself and Erin Fisher, the literacy coordinator, and then brought to staff for feedback and response. The reason it came up was because of incidences in class where students were upset when their teacher was reading text that existed and included a slur. And when the teacher read that aloud, it upset the students. And we wanted to be clear on what was our stance as a district in terms of, do you read those words aloud? Do you not read those words aloud? And I'm going to tell you so that you know, in case you don't know, this is controversial. People have very strong opinions on this within our district, outside of our district, and they feel just as passionately. And when you talk about how experts feel, experts disagree on this topic. So the district has to take a stand. And in this case, through review with staff and through discussion and the administrative team and administrative council, the decision was made to move forward with this policy, which says that we, as teachers, do not read a slur or hate speech aloud to our students. And I'll read you some parts of that. We tried to, in this document, explain the rationale for it and things that we considered. It says that we as a district are choosing not to read aloud slurs and texts that we teach. By disallowing the usage of slurs, even when it comes to reading a text out loud, we are demonstrating to our students that words have power. As individuals, we don't get to arbitrarily decide when they are hurtful and offensive. And it talks about that reading a slur really denies experiences, perspectives, and consequences for people who have had to live with the impacts of language beyond school. In that sense, it's an example of a microaggression. There's a difference between getting to use a derogatory term and having to live with its dehumanizing effects, and that a slur can affect the ability to learn by invoking stereotypes and stereotype threat. And what I challenge us to do as we think about this policy is to put ourselves in the shoes of someone that hears a slur being read aloud and has an immediate visceral reaction to hearing that word. It affects them in a way that isn't a conscious level sometimes, it's just an immediate level. To hear your teacher read that slur aloud, can be hurtful and offensive, regardless of the intention. And certainly that is not our goal as educators. However, that doesn't mean we don't teach that text or remove that text or not talk about it. In fact, the policy says the opposite. It says you need to talk about. We're choosing not to use this word because, and it explains a little bit of that. They should share with students why the words are not being shared, referencing the reasons shared above. Staff members with questions or concerns, are concerned, can contact building administrators. And so that policy has been in place. And then the last thing I'll focus on before we get to questions, is an email that I sent to the staff in November of 2022. And so what had happened is we had had a very public incident, personnel issue that had raised a lot of questions among staff. And they were good questions. They were questions about, when I hear this being happened by students, what should I do? What can I do? What can I say? And it was causing a lot of stress from our staff. And so I sent this email with a hope to provide some clarity so that people understood and had a chance to think about, you know, the expectations and ask questions. And I received positive responses from the clarity, although I'm sure there's still some questions out there. Some of the highlighted language, and I pretty much included the highlighted language is pretty much the whole email, because it's also good. But it does say that it says, this school year, we continue our progress in how we prevent and address the use of slurs and hate speech, including the N-word. Our goal is to be as clear as possible that the use of slur or hate speech is not acceptable, meaning it will be addressed through education and consequences for those that use it, regardless of the form of the word, that being whether it ends in an A or an ER, who says it, and the intention of the person saying it. Hearing a slur or hate speech, regardless of the context, causes harm and may cause confusion about expectations for the use of the word among those who hear it. I'm just going to pause here to highlight something. And this is if you were able to attend presentations that we just had with Percy Brown Jr. and Dr. Briggs. They talked about this and their experience in the use of the word. And Percy Brown spoke extensively, particularly with our students, about the conversations that he has and has had with our students about using a slur for a group with which they identify. So, for example, an African-American student using the N-word, or a person who identifies as LGBTQIA using the F slur. And it was interesting because through that process, students the students that he spoke to had kind of come to an agreement amongst each other that we can't use that word because if we use this word, other kids hear it and they think they can use it. It's confusing to people, and it sets a bad precedent. Some words you just don't say, you know, and particularly in the context of school. So that's where that comes from, and that's the philosophy, and I'll expand upon that in a minute. The exact extent of the consequences will vary based on the specifics of the situation. So I spoke at that at length earlier, but reiterated here. I also had added a part because I had gotten questions about, okay, I understand we can't read this aloud, but what if it's in a movie or something that we're showing? And again, someone could hear that and be upset, so we want to have them be prepared. Anytime hate speech or slurs appear in written, audio, or video resources used for instruction, teachers should first carefully consider the educational purpose of the use of the word and consider if alternative resources or alternate portions, of the same resource could meet those objectives. So is it necessary for the learning? Okay, let's say it is. If they decide to move forward, parental permission and consent should be obtained prior to showing the video, and the option of alternate educational resources should be provided. So the teacher should also consider muting the video. And the reason is because we really want students to be involved in that and families to be involved in deciding whether or not that's appropriate for their child, especially given developmental needs and a student's own experience. So lastly, I'll address what Mr. Hickey had referenced earlier about Dr. Holly's standpoint. So Dr. Holly, just so you know, Shiraki Holly, we just had a Zoom with him last week. We have hired, not necessarily him, but his company, him and his company, because he has developed a model that we really believe is essential for our staff and our students. It's called culturally and linguistically responsive teaching and learning. You've heard about it. This should not be the first time that you're hearing about it. And that really is a method of engaging students by recognizing their background, what they're bringing, and juxtaposing that with kind of what we would consider kind of traditional schooling models. So making sure all kids with different learning styles and backgrounds and experiences are engaged in our curriculum. He sends out a newsletter, periodically, that talks about different issues. And so we've been doing the work with Percy Brown Jr. and Dr. Briggs for several years. And so, our stance on hate speech is informed by their work as well as our own experience, right? The students that I have worked with personally and others have worked with personally that have had upsetting experiences when they hear the use of a slur out loud. Those are the kids that I think we need to put at the top of our list in terms of considering our approach. Dr. Holly, his standpoint, he takes a different position than what the district and other experts do. And he states that if, the N-word is used, ending in an ER, that we should provide a consequence. That's different. But he separates that from using the N-word ending in an A. And he sees those as two different things that should require a different response. He also believes that when the word appears in the text that we should have students say the word. So that conflicts, with our district's approach. And I would say that, he talks about education in both approaches, and that is something where we agree. Like, he feels like you should still educate in either situation. And I think, where we would disagree is that if we hear the word used with an A or an ER, we're going to address it either way, and there will be some form of consequence. Now, if that form of consequence means, conferring with a building administrator, that's one thing. It doesn't mean it's always going to result in a suspension or something. If it's staff, it doesn't mean it's going to result in a suspension for staff or, a letter in the file or whatever it may be. We really, and you may disagree, and you're welcome to disagree, and of course, influence our policy and revise our policy as you see fit. But we really believe that if we end up having a prescriptive consequence for every type of behavior, you really eliminate your ability to address the context of the situation and to be flexible. So I would caution the board about moving in that direction. And, I feel like as a district, that's one of our hallmarks with restorative practices and the work that we do, is that we really want to repair the harm, and there's a variety of ways that can occur. All right, so that probably was over 20 minutes. But that was kind of my quick synopsis. It has all of this stuff in there that you're expected to read, board members. Public is not. So at this point, I open it up to your questions, comments regarding this really important topic.
I'm just glad you've included that word. It's evolving, because it is just changed. It has changed in my lifetime. Oh my goodness, how things have changed. And as an educator for 40 years, it changed, and it's going to continue to change. And I do like the fact that you also included that flexibility, because I remember at first that was my concern, like, oh my gosh, if we get to a zero base, oh my gosh, that takes out the education.
Yep.
There is, and that's where, the first question comes from a kid is why. That's where the education begins. It begins there. So I think I applaud this. I also have a friend who, you mentioned the fact that, perhaps we don't want to necessarily make it something that's kind of more common to the area. But I do believe it's important that in some ways we are more closely aligned with our neighbors. I think that's important, because you have kids who are going to have friends in other schools, and I think that could, I just think that would pose problems too. Perhaps they're good educational experiences, but I think it's good that we're trying to, follow pretty much what Dane County schools are doing. I think you did that. I know you addressed that to me when I talked to you privately, so I appreciate that too.
I think I appreciate all the information. I really support the policies that you've laid out for us and the reasoning. I think that's really important. I do, in the end, fully support the flexibility of I like your interpretation of zero tolerance, you know? And I think where it gets sticky for the public is they really want those stringent, like, when this happens, this is the consequence. But I think, and that's the tricky part for all of us to educate, right? Because it's such a complicated issue. And while I would love to be able to give the public that kind of rhetoric and algorithm, it's just not the right way to do it. So I really appreciate that, or what I feel is the right way to do it. So I really appreciate that part of the way that you've clarified for the staff and all of that. So that's great.
Yeah, sometimes it's easy for me to get on a soapbox, and you can feel that I'm pretty passionate about this, but one of the things that I often hear is about, well, in the real world, you know, there's consequences, you do this and you have this. I don't know what real world people are living in, because decisions are made routinely. If I'm speeding and I get pulled over, I don't know that I'm gonna get a ticket. You know, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. You know, it depends on the situation. I don't speed, but if I were to speed, I should say. Yeah, and if I were to get pulled over. But I do think that is, because the context does matter, in my opinion.
What I really appreciate. Oh, go ahead.
Aaron, I agree with everything you said, and I appreciate all the clarification and reviewing. But again, the reservation I have are the consequences. Yeah, I think they're too broad, which is probably a different opinion. Citing examples would help. You know, there's nothing to say we can't cite examples in the policy, because that still leaves flexibility. But I think it's still too dependent on certain people, what those consequences may be. So again, I would be more comfortable if we gave some scenarios or examples of, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. Realizing there might be some flexibility in to that. Because otherwise, it's a big mystery. You know, people don't know, when we talk about consequences, well, just like you mentioned, is it suspension, expulsion, neither one? You know, I think to be more transparent, it would be helpful, at least for me, and I would assume some public, just cite some examples for us.
I appreciate that, Tom. And to give some credit to our associate principals, they have brought forward this year the idea of doing that with, our entire code of conduct. And so it's going to take a while, but it's not just related to hate speech and the use of slurs, right? It's all of our behaviors. And then but they're put into sort of ranges, it could be as little as this or as big as this. So at least defines the options, right? Because if you come to school intoxicated, you're not going to just get education, right? Something more is going to happen. So kind of shrinking that range, I think, would address your concern, not only for this topic, but for others.
Yeah. And Aaron, you mentioned restorative practice, restorative justice, and I certainly support that. But are there times when we know up front that that is not the option to go to?
Yeah, so there are, and I think I want to clarify, I like this opportunity, I hope everybody watches this, that it's not an either or. And I think sometimes that's what gets confusing for people, is they think, well, you're doing restorative practices, so, there's no consequences. I have a long speech about that, which will be more than 20 minutes, but what I will say is, at times there are consequences, suspension, expulsion, as the board knows well, that do happen. Sometimes that's in addition to restorative practices. Sometimes restorative practices are not an option. I'll give you an example. If someone doesn't take responsibility for their actions, you can't have restorative practices. You can't restore it if they're not able to acknowledge the harm that they've caused. If a victim isn't comfortable meeting and sharing, you can't force that to happen. That is harmful. And so those things happen all the time, and it's not an either or. So I appreciate that question and opportunity to clarify.
I think,
And then
can we,
lastly, Aaron, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
Finish up, Tom.
Lastly, how do you know how effective the consequences are? I mean, do we have data, any type of data out there that, through the behavioral reports or whatever, where the consequence has been administered? Do we have any data to show that, yes, this was an effective consequence? Or, additional consequences were required down the road?
Yes, that's a great question. Repeat offenses is really the best data that we have. So if a situation happens, does it happen again? Now, of course, we only know what we're made aware of. Okay, so we got to be sensitive to that. But that is data that we can look at. I can only speak for my experience at the middle school. Of course, I'm growing to understand the experience at the other buildings. But that was something we would look at for all kinds of all behaviors in terms of repeat offenses, but particularly bullying and harassment. Because if we felt like if we could address something and put a lot of time into it the first time and it doesn't happen again, that was worth the time and the energy to do that and effective. So.
Okay,
we
thank you, Aaron.
do look at that.
Megan?
I think I think it's an interesting idea to include the examples, like you were saying, Tom, and even for the code of conduct. I wonder, though, where the issues that arise or the incidents that arise where we can't share the whole story, and when people can see, well, this is what the spectrum was, or this is it from what they are able to know, this is the information that, or consequence that should be applied. But if there's information that they can't know, then it becomes, an appearance of unfairness or inequity or something. And so that would be one, I would just say that we should think about that as we decide what examples to include or what information to include. Because that could be damaging for victims and other people, especially if there's restorative practices involved. And also personnel, restorative and personnel, I think it could create some other perceptions that maybe we don't need. I don't know.
I can say, in 16 years in this district, I am routinely naive because I just assume that if something that I hear doesn't make sense, I probably don't have enough information. There's probably something missing. But that's based on my experience with the district and my faith and trust in the district and the people that I know and the experiences I've had that would support that. If you're a community member or a family member who, for whatever reason, whether it's your own experiences as a student, just doesn't fully trust the district and their ability to make decisions, and maybe you've had a bad experience, then I think it's natural to sort of wonder, well, that doesn't make sense. They're not handling this correctly. And that is the most difficult part. And so, in my brief time as a superintendent, my 7 months with multiple weather-related calls and difficult decisions to make, I'm trying to be as transparent and proactive as I can. And sometimes saying too much, or the risk of saying too much, more than people have time to listen to, is what I mean by too much. To try to be proactive to that and share as much as I can, because you're right.
Yeah.
Anything else? If not.
No, but I'm glad to hear that this will be an evolving topic.
I just gotta say, Aaron, seriously, your passion is incredible. To hear you think that and say this, it's like, wow. Very, very admirable. And I've learned tonight myself from you. So kudos, thanks for putting this on. It's really, really beneficial. So I know I'm out of line, but hey, what's new? But seriously, I was
Fill
going
out
to
a new
applaud.
piece of paper.
A number of things, just particularly the curriculum thing and Holly. So just thank you very much. It's clear. So you are, it's clear as a leader where your passion is and where you want to roll. So thank you. I just want to give you a little, also, you were here, maybe you weren't here, when I made the snow day call. Were you here for that?
No, I
Okay.
don't think so.
I have an award from the A Council that maybe I'll pass on to you. It's called the Winnie Award. Because I called a snow day and it rained. I mean, there wasn't any snow. So I don't know how you're taking the hits on snow, but I think I hold the record.
I think I have heard that story now.
Yeah, I might, if I can, send it, I would expect it to be in your office though, you know, if I present it framed, you know.
Yeah, oh, yes.
Enough
All right.
said. Thank you for letting me break.
Right on.
Yeah.
If we
Thank you for
can
the
just quick
suggestion.
circle back, just
Yes.
real quick.
Yes, please.
I would also say that I commend the strict line that you've drawn about reading texts or not reading texts and the thought process behind that. And just to reiterate how complicated and nuanced this work is, especially in a community where we are predominantly not part of a marginalized group, whether we're either white or we're, you know, the socioeconomics isn't different. I think it's, I think that's the thing that we continue to forget as a society about how complicated it is and how important it is to remember that we're all humans and that we all have to learn this stuff. And so, and that's going to be hard as we go through that.
Well, you know, and I think sometimes it gets lost that this work isn't strictly about, you know, black and white or, you know, all the racial aspects of society today. There's so many other things with the LGBTQ folks and, you know, any marginalized or underserved, you know, part of the society, to me, all falls under this DEI work. It's not just the folks of color and the students of color. Obviously, that's a predominant part of it, but we have to keep in mind that it's more than just that.
Equity work on any level helps any marginalized or underrepresented
Right.
groups.
Yep. Okay, we have anything else? If not, we're
I would
gonna.
just, Craig, I would just say that that was well said. The challenge is how do we get that same interpretation out to the public?
We're working on it.
It's a constant thing that we will work on, yes.
Okay, we're moving right into summary of the February WEVA board meeting. Mr. Mooney, please.
Okay, thanks. This is the monthly update from WEVA. They have 206 total. Oh, Craig, you were waiting for somebody else?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we just have some folks
Okay.
leaving. Go ahead, Tom.
WEVA employs 206 total staff. 56 of them were hired this school year. Because of enrollment increases. They do have their strategic plan and goals. Their goal is that 70% of the students will meet their growth goals. The graduation rate will increase by 10%, and the decrease of withdrawals by minus 10%. We heard different stories from students, both graduates and high school students, on how virtual learning turned their learning around for them, from being struggling students to successful students. They shared the data on the beginning of the year versus the middle of the year, student growth in the area of reading. And it's interesting because they classify their students in this way. those that need urgent intervention, those that need intervention, those that are on watch, and those that are at and above benchmarks. And you've heard me say before, it's that urgent intervention that they're trying to really increase this year to help support the most struggling students. Another goal that they have is to decrease student engagement, increase student engagement, decrease the failure to participate. And in 2018-19, they had 420 students who failed to participate, whose names came before the board. Last year was down to 152. So we see that trending in the right direction. Unfortunately, last semester, there were 96, so we'll see how the second semester rolls out. We heard from we had strategic plan updates from their advisory councils, which include the family council and the staff council. And right now, they're preparing families and staff for liftoff of state testing this spring. And that concludes my monthly report.
Any questions for Tom? Comments? If not, we'll move along.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Tom. To the district administrator's report. Aaron.
Okay, so first thing is you have a couple of drills, in this case, actual safety issues that were addressed. There were 2 medical holds at the high school. I'm going to use this to segue right into recognitions because having, living in this building and seeing the way that the staff respond when there is a medical hold, which is typically to protect the safety and privacy of a student or staff member who is in need of medical attention, is so impressive. And, there was an incident where occurred during lunch, which is a time, that's always our worst case scenario, like we have to do something during lunch. And staff responded and, collectively just intervened and helped. And it was just a really powerful example. And I just, kudos to the high school staff and the high school administrative team for just preparing staff to be able to respond in those situations and protect the privacy of the students involved. Mr. Jacobson was here earlier, and I just wanted to again acknowledge everyone involved in the hiring process. We are very grateful to Mr. Finstead for his service to the district, and also excited for Mr. Jacobson and as he begins that new role, but grateful for the community involvement. And once again, 757 people filled out a survey saying what they're looking for in a principal. That's amazing. Of course, it was School Resource Officer Appreciation last week. We are still appreciating Officer Zietzma, and we'll do so in the future.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, he had some big shoes to fill and has done a wonderful job. Bus Driver Appreciation Week was, technically last week. Tomorrow is sort of our Bus Driver Appreciation Day. There'll be a breakfast for the bus drivers, and just want to acknowledge Nelson's.
Where does that happen?
Some restaurant. I don't remember. Not in the district, outside of the district.
Okay.
Nelson's, reminder, serves other districts, lesser districts. But we are grateful for them. And it's amazing with the bus shortages out there, and we are looking for drivers. But compared to other communities, Nelson's retention rate is very high for their employees, real positive culture. And there's so many people involved, and of course from a district end, that is largely Jeff Mahoney and his leadership. But the staff at Nelson's, with whom I get to speak at 4 in.the morning on some days, do an excellent job. The drivers are so student-focused. We're just very grateful for them. Do a great job. They literally have our students' lives in their hands.
Mm-hmm. You bet.
I've given that speech to many a student before. So congratulations. I know you saw this, but Spartan Headquarters was selected as one of 431 schools in the nation as gold certified. So 3 students are going to be eligible to represent DECA and Spartan Headquarters at the international level in Orlando. So that's really kind of a cool thing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Our DECA crew is
It's really exciting.
incredible.
It's amazing, the program that they continue to build. I don't know how they do it. They don't sleep. String fling, unfortunately, I was not able to attend, but I heard wonderful things about how that went. A reminder, that's all of our orchestra students, grades 5 through 12, spend a day kind of workshopping and practicing, and then it culminates in a concert that evening at the middle school, and high schoolers helping younger students. Just a great event, and it is all due to Leanna Hershey and her leadership. It's amazing, the event. T-shirts and I don't know. It's outstanding. What a great opportunity. And that's hers. That's not something that someone tells her to do. That's something she wants to do.
The first real initiative that we passed when I joined the school board in 2010 was to form the orchestra. Back then, I think we had maybe 6 kids that
Yeah.
were 3rd grade, 4th grade, something like that, and it's grown to what it is today is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's absolutely remarkable.
One
Yeah,
of my,
go ahead.
can I interrupt your report to just talk on that? So I'm,
Yeah, if you were able to attend.
I would, yes. It was one thing that I've noticed about it that's really fun that Miss Hershey puts in there is that she often incorporates some other community musician. And like I think last year or the year before, it was a fiddle group that was so fun to listen to. And then this year it was a composer who worked with the students for the whole time to learn the piece that she had composed. And then she also led one of the composing workshops at String Fling. And so that was really, that just is a special opportunity that I don't know other programs get, so I second all
Yes.
of that.
That's
Very
all of
much.
her initiative. I was supposed to be a narrator, but I was at wrestling. So, which we're not going to talk about. Then the last thing I wanted to acknowledge is just safety. Today, all day long, Dr. Brookhauser and Sarah Buzalaki represented the district at a training, and I can never remember what it stands for, so I'm going to read this embarrassingly. School Safety and Violent Event Incident Management Training. And so really proud of our district leadership with safety. Our administrators are so invested, and so are our staff on that training, and they volunteered to attend this training and bring their wisdom back. We've also, I don't know how much I've shared, I guess I shared it with the board in the minutes, but I'll share publicly that the district has contracted with a school safety consultant, Corey Saffold. During the day, he does that work in Verona, but he also has a consultant firm that he's working with, and he's currently conducting a safety audit of the district. And we'll bring that feedback back to us so we can make changes to be safer. Next, I'm going to share just some photos from around the district with you. Reminder, this was Tom Mooney's great idea, and so these are things that you could see, maybe you've seen on social media. We have the class positive character trait community quilt, so each kid, each student made a square recognizing their classmates for their kindness. Keeping with the theme, WMCF also has a kindness focus for this month, and they had a theme. Now, these are our power leaders, 5th graders, and there's similar things in each of the buildings. You should know the middle and the high school also have student leaders that do this kind of work, making posters about how the challenges for showing kindness, and there was a bingo challenge. So just spreading the kindness around the district. The 5th grade won the grade level McFarland Food Pantry Challenge at WMCF, and I was there when they were, throughout the process, they were revealing the updates, and it was intense. So they really, that competition thing works. And we're so grateful for the McFarland Food Pantry and glad to partner.
That pantry is so grateful to this school.
Yeah, they do a lot.
Yes.
And it's families that do it. I mean,
Yeah.
the district doesn't bring the food. This was a post about new books for the 5th grade classroom libraries. And reminder, we want kids to see themselves and others in the books that they read. They talk about mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. That's a speech for another day. But a nice thing, and as was shared in the post, we're focusing on a grade level at a time, updating these classroom libraries with some new offerings. The Science Bowl competition, just, so grateful. They had the Regional Science Bowl competition, and so grateful for Mary Donegan for her leadership of that. They get so excited. It is really intense. It is fast-paced. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's really cool and very scary for someone that doesn't know most of the answers. I am intimidated by these scholars. As we've mentioned before, Little Mermaid, I love this picture, had a great run. World Read Aloud Day celebrated throughout the district. Here's some teachers reading aloud. And I believe that's a social studies teacher and a science teacher. So just pointing out, we read across the curriculum. Also heard a choir teacher reading to students. This is one of my, I love them all, but this post really, you got me the goosebumps. I might have shed a little tear. The McFarland High School has a club called Girl Up, and the members visited fourth graders to talk about anybody being in STEM on International Women and Girls in Science Day. So just a neat thing. Anytime we can do cross-grade things, that just makes me happy.
I agree.
So appreciate the advisors of that group for their leadership. Of course, we mentioned Hope Week activities. Was really fun to see that, and an important reminder to students about their mental health during what is traditionally a very difficult time of the month, or month of the year for students. Auto 3 class, it's just nice to see some of the hands-on stuff. We talk about it, we don't often get to see it. So Mr. Hahn, amazing educator with our students. That's engagement for you. Of course, Optimist Senior of the Month, Mr. Mooney knows well as the spokesperson. He puts on a good show each month, and Bryn Beery here recognized as the student of the month, senior of the month, very deserving. I'm sure she's loving that parking spot when we do have school, whenever we do have school. School Counselors Week. Angie, I want to acknowledge, put together this wonderful post recognizing our school counselors. We will be adding school counselors next year, but these are our amazing 6 who, what they do for our students, staff, and families, and it really is all 3 of those groups. It's just amazing, so grateful for them. That concludes the slideshow. Upcoming events, I've mentioned several of those. A few important things. Public Schools Week is coming up February 27th. Also, that is National Eating Disorders Awareness Week. March is Women's History Month, Youth Art Month, Music in Our Schools Month. There were some typos in the minutes that none of you noticed. I called it Jurassic in Our Schools Month in the minutes, so that just encourage you to read those a little more closely. Read Across America Day is March 2nd. Kindergarten orientation. Wow. Right? Whoa. Yeah, that's crazy. Doesn't March sound nice? Maintenance Workers Appreciation Day is on the 3rd. School Social Work Week, soft spot in my heart, coming up on March 5th. We currently have 2 wonderful school social workers we'll be recognizing. And then we've got our next school board meeting, which means I don't need to talk about the rest. So that concludes a lot of me.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
So we will move on to some action items here. Okay, we have action on second reading and adoption of policies, and there are a number of them there that I won't read here, but what I will do instead, I think, is go ahead and make the motion. So I will do that. I'll move to approve the second reading and adoption of policies 2260.02, services for bilingual students, English learners. 2414, human growth and development. 2460.03, independent educational evaluation, or IEE. 3120.04, employment of substitutes. 3425, benefits. 4425, benefits. 5113, open enrollment program inter-district. 5517.01, bullying. 7440.01, video surveillance and electronic monitoring. 8740, protection of district funds. 3217, weapons. 4217, weapons. 5111, eligibility of resident and non-resident students. 7217, weapons. 7440.03, small unmanned aircraft systems, as recommended by administration. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
One thing I want to note, I think in your reading, I think you said the human growth and development,
Yeah.
and I thought that was on for first reading, not
Yeah,
second reading and adoption.
that's correct. Now that you say that, that is absolutely correct.
So would you like to modify your motion?
Yes. I would like to modify my motion by removing 2414, human growth and development, from this motion for approval of the second reading, as that particular policy is a first reading still.
Thank you.
Okay? Kate, you second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Okay. Action on first reading of policy 2414, human growth and development. This is the second first reading of this policy, as we had some questions during the first reading at a meeting last week. We will discuss some of this information, research regarding the policy and statutes, make recommendations for changing before the second reading. If you're in favor of this recommendation, I would look for a motion.
I think we do have some, I mean, someone can make a motion, I can't stop you from doing that, but I think there were some things that people wanted to discuss with this one as well.
Sure, and we can do that, I guess, after we get a motion.
Yeah. I'll make
I'll
the
make the
motion.
motion.
Oh,
Okay, he can
I
make the
got-
motion. I'll second.
okay, Tom, thank you. Kate, discussion.
So I sent an email to you, and I'll share the content of that with the public verbally here right now. There were some questions that the board members had raised last week about some content in the policy. I've also received some feedback from the community on the policy. I wanted to share a couple things. When you look at the top of the policy, it says the very top, the board directs the students receive instruction in human growth and development consistent with chapter 118. Such instruction will include the following. So that was a choice that a previous board had made, that the language would be will include. According to state statute, you are not required to include those elements. They are recommended by statute. That first section there is not required by statute. Both A and B are not required by statute. So that's a decision the board can make. Do you want to keep it as is, which is will include? Do you want to keep it will include some of those things? Do you want to take all of those out? That's a decision for the board to make. So I don't know if you want to talk about them piece by piece, or if you want me to do the whole spiel.
I think the only, I think there was only one, I think a lot of the items listed in the optional parts, I think are really appropriate. I mean, it feels like it's a lot about health and scientific knowledge and medically necessary knowledge and things like that. For me personally, the only one that I thought maybe I would like to see go is under B3, the address the positive connection between marriage and parenting. I think that starts to go into that area that we talked about last time where, I mean, I'm sure that there is positive research about that, but I think it goes into that area where it might not make all of our students and community feel included or even represent a lot of our constituents, really.
So Megan, do you have a suggestion on how that could be more inclusive? That item?
Well, I guess I'd have to see the information that we would present that is covered under that line because I think it's connecting marriage and parenting and someone who's not married and maybe single parenting could be, think like, oh, is there a negative connection to my type of parenting versus, because they're unmarried, or even the child.
Yeah, I would say the kids.
Yeah, how the child might feel about that. So I think I'd have to see more of the specific things taught to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and the way you explain that, Megan, I certainly concur with your opinion. I guess I just didn't interpret it in that fashion, but if others may, then we have to re-examine that.
I guess one thing that kind of jumped out to me reading it is that it seems to be a almost overbearing push toward marriage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The entire policy is kind of pointed toward, the ideal situation would be for all of our kids to abstain until they get married and then get married, then have kids, and everything is great. And I don't know, I don't know that that's, necessarily true, and I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But what would I do differently? That's where you catch me. I don't know. I don't know what I would do differently. If I would take the references to, the ideal end game is marriage and family, I don't know if I would take it out. I just don't know. I just feel like it's really pushed by the district in this policy.
In the policy.
It's interesting you say that, Craig, because when you take a look at it, that part of the policy could have been written in 1950 or 1960. And we are in 2023 now.
It's true.
Culture has changed a lot.
The family units look so very different now. I guess that's why I'm saying, like, what positive connection are they talking about? Because I imagine that whatever positive connection they're trying to inform the students about is probably also found in a lot of different relationships. Whether it's it's, and I don't even mean relationships between adults, but like relationships between students and parents and guardians and caretakers.
Yeah, extended caretakers.
Yeah.
Well,
So that's why I think we should just take it out. Because I don't have enough information to come up with a alternative.
Another term could be committed relationships, but that's open for a lot of misinterpretation also.
I think it just doesn't do justice to the parents and families who have one parent
Or non-traditional.
or non-traditional coupling, or I think it does, and it's an injustice to single parents and even co-parenting. There's a lot of parents who are really strong parents when they're co-parenting and not living together and are much better parents that way.
Sure.
So I don't know,
So what do we do from here, Mr. Tarnitzer? Do we
Well, I
sit
can-
down and talk about redoing it, or?
Yeah, so you could say that you move, we're not done with discussing the policy, but if that's a change, removing item B3 that's being proposed, then you could, adopt that when we get to the second reading and adoption. I could make the revision for the second reading, and then you can adopt the revised policy at that time. That is a
think, Tom?
choice. I mean, you've
You
revised
agreeable?
policies before.
So I think most of this should be included because it's important to teach this. I agree with you. I think I know like where they were going there, this is an old policy and I think a lot of it was based on data that came out a while ago. I think I'm fine with taking that just completely out. The other thing is, in the top section that Aaron was talking about, such instruction will include the following. We could modify that to say may include the following. That way, depending on interpretation of whoever's teaching this, right? They may choose to teach all of it, or they may choose to eliminate certain parts.
I thought the same thing, Kate, but the only trouble is then I feel like you can end up having a teacher out on a limb. And I just wondered in some ways, it should be our job to say, look, let's just not go here.
And
I'm not
I
sure.
think that's where the curriculum comes in, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
The idea is
Yeah.
that the
Yeah,
teachers teach the curriculum to fidelity and would hopefully be mostly consistent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
But I see your
just
point,
so the
Kate.
board and the community is aware, this policy sets certain things that are part of that curriculum, but the curriculum is much more than that, and there's an advisory council
Right.
that helps determine that.
And
sort
that
of
includes
interprets it.
Community people
Yes.
and parents as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
correct?
by statute.
Right.
And note, this language is right out of the statute
Right.
as well. All of, this whole first part is, but it states recommended for that, so.
Oh, so are we good to do that?
So we're taking it out,
Taking it out?
taking out B3.
Yeah.
That's what I would recommend.
Tom, you're good?
Yes.
All
And
right.
then the second part, so it starts with, in my case, it's the bottom of my page, but I don't know where it is for you. The following shall also be incorporated. Oh, let me just, well, I guess you said what B3 was, but I want to make sure the public hears that too. We removed from B3 is the instructional program will also include the following: address the positive connection between marriage and parenting has been removed. Again, it's not officially adopted, we're just moving on to the next step.
Right.
Yep.
So then this part is, this next part that I'm going to read, just for clarity, it does say this content is required. The statute requires this be taught.
Yeah.
The following shall also be incorporated into the above subjects when age appropriate. That is language in the statute that we are proposing adding. That's why it's in green. In the same course and during the same year. And then it lists out, A through H items. And, the board board members had shared some concerns about the content of that. And so in my research, looking at some options just for your consideration, of course, you can leave it as is. It is required by statute. It's not something that the board can change
Yeah.
without legislative action. You could, I guess I'll go to the other extreme, which would be, you could just add the phrase that says, the following will also be, the board, the curriculum will include content about subjects when age appropriate as directed by as required by chapter 118.
Yes.
You could just say that, not
Yep.
have any language. And then the middle option, and I'm not suggesting any of them, the middle option is sort of say that as required by the statute, and then list what's required. All three options are available to the board. Leave it as is, say, we're gonna follow the statute, or the middle, which is, we're gonna follow the statute, and here's what it says. That makes sense.
I think,
I see.
for clarity's sake, we should probably do it that way, the last way.
So you're
We're gonna
proposing
follow the statute.
middle, and here's what it says.
Yeah.
I get really torn because this is the part of the policy that I feel like could do the most damage to, so, you know, like, and wouldn't be the most inclusive. So part of me wants to not list it and say the first option where we're just.
We're gonna follow the statute.
Yeah.
I think
How-
that's what
And not
I think
list the
too.
specifics
And not
of it?
list it, because it
Yeah.
doesn't, I mean, we have to follow the statute. Hopefully the statute changes, but I don't also want to, just spelling it out is, people are going to read that, and I feel like it doesn't align with what we're doing up above. So I think we just put it as we're following the statute, and whatever that statute is what we'll follow.
I agree.
Point-
I agree. That's-
Point well taken.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah,
Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, sure, I agree.
Sure. I mean, it doesn't feel 100% transparent, but also I feel like it's the most triggering language. So it feels like, I mean, I totally agree with you, Kate. That would be my preference too.
No.
And parents are gonna pay attention to that, the annual update that they receive for their kids about what the curriculum they're receiving. So
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
I am too.
And do you mind if I highlight some of the parts just for the public that
Sure.
are the most, I'm not
Please
trying
do.
to make anybody upset, but
No.
I just want to be transparent to the public about
I
what
think you
we're
need to be
talking about.
transparent.
Yep.
And I believe we're talking about A, B, and then I've also had concerns about H, so I don't know how people feel about that. But I know A and B we talked about at our last meeting. A says presents abstinence from sexual activity as a preferred choice of behavior for unmarried students. So we talked about that and the use of marriage in there. It was your previous conversation. Also, I'm just going to acknowledge the moment, the things you never thought you would do would be read these things to a group of adults while being recorded. All right, item B, it's just like, this is surreal, but emphasizes that abstinence from sexual activity before marriage is the only reliable way to prevent pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, including human immunodeficiency virus and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. That was the other one, and we talked about that at length, I felt like last time. And then H had come up, and I know some board members had some questions, and community member had shared concerns about H, which says explains the process under Chapter 48, 195 of the Wisconsin statutes, under which a parent of a newborn child may relinquish custody of the child to a law enforcement officer, emergency medical services practitioner, or hospital staff member. And the concerns about that, just to make sure the board is aware, related to that, were just that, it's somewhat pejorative related to students and families who have adoption, and that may be, could be offensive language for students and families that, have adoption in their family, which includes my own, So I just wanted to share that with the public so that they know what we're really talking about.
I think C also was had potential to be problematic.
Yeah. C is provides instruction in parental responsibility and the socioeconomic benefits of marriage for adults and their children. So very similar to
what you had.
The language we
Three.
just removed.
Yep.
Okay. I can make those revisions.
Please do.
And then if you want to continue, we had the motions, we had discussion, so there's no more discussion.
If there is no more discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
I do have some discussion.
No,
Oh,
we didn't want to, no. I thought we didn't want to pass this until we,
That's just the first reading, though.
first reading.
So we're,
Yeah.
so this is just passing, okay.
The first reading with
I
the
didn't-
adjustment.
With the adjustments, yeah, the
the
changes.
first
Which is
reading
the-
is,
I
the
got
second
it,
reading
Got
process
it.
is very
Yeah.
confusing to me, but
okay.
Yeah, it's kind of
Then in
confusing
that case, I
sometimes,
say
but
aye.
it'll-
That was in my
it'll-
fourth
it'll
term
represent
before I
what we
figured it
discussed
out.
here when you see it next.
Right.
Okay.
okay. I do have some other discussion related to that, though.
Okay,
It doesn't change my vote to what.
Okay.
But it's just something I think we need to think about. So, we had some feedback about the curriculum from a parent in the community. And I wanted to know when the last time the human growth and development curriculum was updated or reviewed, and when it would be currently reviewed again. Do you know that answer?
I do.
Off the top of your head? Okay.
yeah, so we review the curriculum annually and make changes. What we haven't done, and I don't know the last date that we did the full advisory council, that pandemic thing sort of got in the way of that work. And so our current plan is to make modifications to the curriculum, based on staff recommendations and changes for the remainder of this year, and next year to reconvene the large advisory council, which is a process I've been involved with since day one in joining the district, a very effective process. What I will say is that there is a difference between the work of that advisory council, which is to set the objectives, which are very specific, if you've ever looked at it, for what's covered. The actual content, the resources, of course, the council doesn't have the capacity, nor is it appropriate for them to decide, because those should be constantly changing.
Right.
We received 2 concerns today. You received 1, I received 2, about part of the content, which was distributed to families, which was clearly outdated. We wouldn't teach parts of that content were just inappropriate and outdated and offensive in my opinion. And I can say this because the response from staff already were, yes, you're right, that we wouldn't have actually taught that, but we shared this resource with you that has content. When we have a resource, we don't teach everything that's in it. We do make modifications, so.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Because the one thing I was going to say is because that I'm very happy about that's on your radar already, because it looked like the curriculum was last updated in 2019 based on the feedback that we had gotten. This whole, I think human growth and development and kind of the spectrum of gender and, identity and all of this has really blown up in the last 3 to 4 years. And specifically, the resolutions that we passed, the support of diversity and equity, and then the ones for the transgender, non-binary, and all LGBTQIA plus students, those were both since this last revision.
Right.
And so, I just wanted to make sure that reviewing the curriculum was on the radar, to make sure that it aligns with those resolutions and then also our strategic plan. So.
And I think it's important for the board to be conscious and to acknowledge the many viewers who have hung on this long out in the public is that this is very controversial. We talked about hate speech being controversial. Like human growth and development across the nation, including in our state, there's a lot of different opinions. And, you know, I encourage people to look at it is digestible, the document that is on our website. And you can see where we first start talking about gender issues. And I can share that is something that has come through with much discussion and thought, and is probably very different than what you may see in another community, but that has been the norms that our, you know, community has adopted, but certainly does not represent the feelings and beliefs of all of our community members.
Right. And that's important. I mean, as much as we want to protect, you know, our resolutions protect some, you know, communities. There is also that, you know, other communities that we also do have to use our culturally and linguistically, you know, responsive, and make sure that their culture is also included. And so, yeah, we're
Okay.
definitely on the right path, so, thank you.
And I think that's where our district vision, our district mission comes in. 'Cause that really should be the guiding light of all that we do. And now with the strategic plan, like you mentioned, Megan, I mean, we're on solid ground here to move forward with this.
Yep.
And it's clear cut.
Yep, you're
Well,
correct.
Thank you, Tom, for saying that. So important.
I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I will make that.
Bruce, thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Kate, thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0, and we are adjourned at 9:10 PM. Well done, everyone, well done. Thank you, Tom. Good
You're
luck.
welcome.
Safe
Good luck,
travels
Tom.
and all that good stuff,
Yeah.
and we'll see you when you
Yes.
get back.